These are the 5 poems that have left the biggest impact on me. These are the 5 poems that I still think about often, and poems that have shaped the way I view the world, and poems that have shaped the way I view art and philosophy and literature and poetry and myself. Hi, I'm Annie. This is the lavender field of literature, and I'm here today to talk about my 5 favourite poems. Now, am I aware that the bookshelves are not really aligned properly behind me? Yes, but we don't care about that, we care about poetry. And in making this list, I set 2 rules for me. One was that I couldn't qualify any books written in verse or epic poems or anything that could be book length. They all had to be relatively short poems, contained poem. And second was that I could only mention a single poem by an author. So these are my 5 favourite poems instead of my 5 favourite poets. And I'm not just gonna jump into the poems. I'm gonna read you either the entire poem or a bit of the poem, and then I'm gonna chat about why I love this specific poem. I just wanted to talk a bit about my favourite poetry, you know? So I'm here to talk a bit about my favourite poetry, even if no one cares. And I will be going in chronological order. I have 1 poem from the 18th century, 2 poems from the 19th century, 1 poem from the 20th century, and 1 poem from the 21st century. And the first poem is actually a poem that I've read the most recently. I read it for the first time in June, and I was not expecting it because I didn't even read it in a poetry collection. I read Candide or Optimism by Voltaire last month, which is not the poem. This is a prose novel. In the appendices, in Appendix 2 to be precise, there is Voltaire's poem on the Lisbon disaster, which referred to the Lisbon earthquake which occurred on November the 1st in 1755. It is a 7-page poem, so it's way too long for me to read, even though it's not under copyright anymore. But I will be reading the first page of it. The Lisbon earthquake, or an inquiry into the maxim, whatever is right, is right. O wretched man, earth fated to be cast, abyss of plagues and miseries the worst. Horrors and horrors, griefs and griefs must show that man's the victim of unceasing woe. And lamentations which inspire my strain prove that philosophy is false and vain. Approaching crowds and meditate awhile yon shattered walls and view each ruined pile. Women and children heaped on mountain high, limbs crushed which under ponderous marble lie. Wretched unnumbered in the pangs of death, for mangled, torn and panting for their breath. Buried beneath their sinking roofs expire, and end their wretched lives in torment dire. Say, when ye hear the piteous half-formed cries, or from their ashes see the smoke arise, say, will ye then eternal laws maintain, which God to cruelties like these constrain? Whilst you these facts replete with horror view, will you maintain death to their crimes was due? And can you then impute a sinful deed to babes who on their mother's bosom bleed? Was then more vice in fallen Lisbon found than Paris, where voluptuous joys abound? Was less debauchery to London known, where opulence luxurious holds her throne? Earth Lisbon swallows the light sons of France, protect the feast or lead the sprightly dance, spectators who undaunted courage show, while you behold your dying brethren's woe. With stoical tranquillity of mind, you seek the causes of these ills to find. But when like us fate's rigours you have felt, become humane like us you'll learn to melt. When the earth gapes my body to entomb, I justly may complain of such a doom. And it goes on like that for 6 more pages. It is absolutely wonderful. I'm going to relate this to Candide, which has so far been my favourite book of the year, and it deals with the same concept of whatever is right, which is the optimism as mentioned. In Candide, the narrative text, Voltaire really discusses that philosophical problem, that philosophical theory, satirically. It is very funny. Like, is it gruesome? Yeah, but it is very funny. Whereas within the poem, really kind of that cruelty of life and that cruelty of that idea comes through so vividly through his, again, poetic depiction, and through his kind of, it isn't done through humor like it is in Candide, but it's done through the poetic couplets, which are absolutely some of my favorites. I considered putting Pope on the list, but like I couldn't think of a single poem by Pope which impacted me like this did, even though I read this again last month. Again, it's that such vivid depiction of the cruelty of nature, but also how men excuse that nature and how we use philosophy to justify things that shouldn't be justified. And it's the way that it's almost light-heartedly describing these horrible things, because there's just this levity to how it rolls off the tongue. You almost not forget, but you almost miss the absolute horror of the poem. And that is just something that I absolutely adore. I always love when horrible things, or like ugliness of mankind or ugliness of nature, is contrasted with something lovely, something aesthetic, something wondrous and pleasant. It just impacted me in a way that took me by such a surprise, and that left a lasting impact. Whereas I've read this poem, though I've read it for the first time last month, I've read it like 5 times since, because I just keep wanting to get back to it. I've read it aloud several times, and just like I've got like, it's gotten stuck, not so much in my head, but like it's gotten stuck in my heart. It has gotten stuck in my mind, but like not in a way where it's like an earworm, but whereas it's more of a philosophical worm that has gotten stuck there. And Voltaire did it twice within one book, and I think that is the thing about the poem that makes it so marvelous, is because he already hit all those points. So that poem could have felt very repetitive, or just felt like, oh, that was fun little extra piece of stuff by Voltaire, but instead it felt like its own wonderful piece that is a companion to Candide. I think that those were all my thoughts about the poem, but it's absolutely stellar, and I do recommend reading it completely. I would love to read it completely, but it would take me like, well, 7 times as long as it took me to read that one little section. Following Voltaire, we move on to the 19th century. And we have my 2 men, my 2 literary men. Were they wonderful human beings? Perchance not, but they were very romantic. This was the first poem I read by this poet. This was also one of the first classic poems that I read, and that is When We Two Parted by Lord Byron. Lord Byron. We all love Lord Byron. We don't all love Lord Byron, but I'm just gonna jump into the poem. When we two parted, in silence and tears, half broken-hearted, to severe for years, pale grew thy cheek and cold, colder thy kiss, truly that hour foretold, sorrow to this. The dew of the morning sunk chill on my brow, it felt like the warning of what I feel now. Thy vows are all broken, and light is thy fame. I hear thy name spoken, and share in its shame. They name thee before me, and knelt to mine ear. A shudder comes o'er me, why wert thou so dear? They know not I knew thee, who knew thee too well. Long, long shall I rue thee, too deeply to tell. In secret we met, in silence I grieve, that thy heart could forget, thy spirit deceive. If I should meet thee, after long years, how should I greet thee? With silence and tears. I'm not gonna keep running, but like, I don't know if it's Lord Byron's best poem, but Jesus Christ, that poem has sewn itself to my heart. I am a sucker for the romantics. I don't know where my love for romanticism started, but I definitely knew that I loved the romantics when I first read the romantics. Actually, what originally prompted me to go and search for Byron's poetry, for all of the romantics poetry, was Doctor Who Series 12. It's The Haunting of Villa Diodati, which is the one in which Byron is in, and that actually made me fall in love with Byron, I'm not gonna lie. It's like, but it's not the first one. Like, Doctor Who made me fall in love with Vincent van Gogh when I was a little kid. So when I was a teenager, it made me fall in love with Byron. I mean, I knew who Lord Byron was before that, but I hadn't really read his poetry. And I don't know if this was the first Byron poem that I read, but it was the first that really stuck to me, and that's always stuck to me. I am absolutely a sucker for themes surrounding death and love and leaving and goodbyes and heartache and tragedy. A lot of those weren't actual themes, but they were just like, that is romanticism, but that is why it makes so much sense why I love the romantics and why romanticism just works for me. But I am also just a sucker for the ABAB rhyme scheme. It's probably my favorite one. And I just actually wrote a poem last month, which I'm quite proud of, that was written in, well, kind of an ABAB rhyme scheme. And Byron uses it, and he uses it here, and it just there is this rhythm to it. Even though I love heroic couplets, there's something about the AB rhyme scheme that just, it feels the most natural. Like there's something, I don't want to say juvenile, and I'm not saying this is a criticism, but there's something so whimsical about a heroic couplet. Like it just didn't. AB rhyme scheme, it just feels not tragic, it feels inevitable. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like a romanticism, you often think about the way it's like prophetic. There's this eventuality to it. I might sound like a lunatic when I say that I find that in AB rhyme scheme, but I think it just fits with romanticism so freaking well, and Byron does it, I think, better than maybe anyone else. It might be my favourite poem there is. And I know it's kind of a basic answer, it's a very popular poem, but I think it's popular for a reason. There is something so naturally, humanely tragic about it. And talking about tragedy, we have our other lovely 19th century man, our lovely gothic boy. Where's his book? I thought I was going to just like turn around and pull the book, but I can't find the book. A tragedy has occurred, but the tragedy had a happy ending. And this is my favourite collection of poetry. It is Edgar Allan Poe, but as we were talking about, we're not talking about collections, we're talking about a single individual poem. I do think that The Raven is Poe's best poem. The Raven is just, when we're talking about how it reads, how it runs, how it just like rolls off the tongue, it's just so melodic, and there's nothing as brilliant as The Raven. But I'm not going to pick The Raven. But the reason why I'm going with the one of my favourite 5 that I'm going with, the reason why I'm going to go with it is because it is the one that has influenced me as a writer the most, and kind of as a person the most, and that is To Helen. I saw thee once only, years ago. I must not say how many, but not many. It was a July midnight, and from out a full-orbed moon, that like thine own soul soaring, sought a precipitate pathway up through heaven, there fell a silvery silken veil of light, with quietude and sultriness and slumber, upon the upturned faces of 1,000 roses, roses that grew in an enchanted garden, where no wind dared to stir, unless on tiptoe, fell on the upturned faces of these roses, that gave out in return for the love-light their odorous souls in an ecstatic death, fell on the upturned faces of these roses, that smiled and died in despair, enchanted, by thee and by the poetry of thy presence. Clad all in white, upon a violet bank, I saw thee half reclining, while the moon fell on the upturned faces of the roses, and on thine own, upturned, alas, in sorrow. Was it not fate that on this July midnight, was it not fate, whose name is also sorrow, that bade me pause before that garden gate, to breathe the incense of those slumbering roses? No footsteps stirred, the hated world all slept, save only thee and me. O heaven, O God, how my heart beats in coupling those 2 words, save only thee and me. I paused, I looked, and in an instant all things disappeared. O bear in mind, this garden was enchanted. The pearly lustre of the moon went out. The mossy banks and the meandering paths, the happy flowers and the repining trees were seen no more. The very roses' odours died in the arms of the adoring airs. All expired save thee, save less than thou, save only the divine light in thine eyes, save but the soul in thine uplifting eyes. I saw but them, they were the world to me. I saw but them, saw only them for hours, saw only them until the moon went out. What wild, hard history seemed to lie unwritten upon those crystalline, celestial spheres. How dark a woe, yet how sublime a hope. How silently serene a sea of pride. How daring an ambition, yet how deep, how fathomless a capacity for love. But now, at length, dear Diane sank from sight into a western couch of thunder cloud, and thou, a ghost, amid the entombing trees, didst glide away. Only thine eyes remained, they would not go, they never yet have gone, lighting my lonely pathway home that night. They have not left me, as my hope hath since. They follow me, they lead me through the years. They are my ministers, yet I their slave. Their office is to illumine and enkindle. My duty to be saved by their bright light, and purified in their electric fire, and sanctified in their Elysian fire. They fill my soul with beauty, which is hope, and are far up in heaven. The stars I kneel to in the sad, silent watches of my night, while even in the meridian glare of day, I see them still, two sweetly scintillant Venuses, unextinguished by the sun. It is not only a very beautiful poem, because it is an incredibly beautiful poem, and I love the fact that it's a beautiful poem that has a rhythm of its own. It's not like I've sort of talked about how I love the heroic couplets or how I love ABAB rhyme scheme, but I also love poems that do rhyme, that do have a melody, because I think poetry always needs a melody, but it doesn't rely on that. It doesn't build itself around that. It has a path of its own. That's not why I love that poem. That's not why I consider it my favourite. And now having read it, I do go, yes, it's my favourite poem. I absolutely adore his depiction of beauty and grace in the context of death. And I'm just a sucker for the aesthetic macabre. I know it's very questionable sometimes, at least some people find it, and it's very cliched, but I am. And Poe kind of made me appreciate that from a new angle, with a new degree. I know his poetry is not necessarily the most novel, and it's not for everyone, because some people are like, it's just the same thing again and again and again. But that's what I love about poetry, is like, it's different for everyone, and everyone loves different types of poetry. But Poe's poetry really speaks to me, because I think he views the world sometimes from a similar or through a similar lens than I do, and that is a poem that has kind of unintentionally influenced a lot of my writing, in what it notices, in what it focuses on, in how it views the world, in how it's kind of like soft and quiet, and it looks from afar, but it examines things very closely. I think I'm gonna move on to the 20th century then. Yes, I will. This is another recent one, and this is another one that came to me by absolute, like, complete and utter surprise. I was curious, which is why I wanted to read this poetry. I thought I might like it, I might hate it. Did not envision in any world for it to be one of my favorite collections of poetry ever. And the poet is actually Allen Ginsberg. I know, the Beat Generation. Also, when I looked in the mirror this morning, I thought to myself, not in the best way, I kind of very much look like someone who would read the Beat Generation and unironically like it. Anyways, not Howl. This is a collection of Howl, Kaddish and other poems, but do not forget the other poems, because the other poems contain some of my favourite poems. And the poem I'm actually going to talk about, the poem that, like, it touched me, it hit me, it shook me. I read it aloud yesterday when I was going through this collection. Like, I was looking through all my favourite poems and be like, what are my top 5? And I read it aloud, and even though a lot of the times poetry arises emotion in me, it rarely arises such emotion as this did. Like, I couldn't get through the reading. The poem that I'm talking about is Lysergic Asset. Can't read it in its entirety, because A, it's under copyright, and B, it's a bit of a long poem. I'm gonna read you the beginning of the poem, but where the poem really starts shaking me and hitting me is, well, I don't know, it's like all the way through. It's like you can't really read a section of a poem, and like, it's not a good enough representation of the poem, but I'm gonna read you the beginning of the poem. It is a multiple million-eyed monster. It is hidden in all its elephants and shells. It hummeth in the electric typewriter. It is electricity connected to itself. If it hath wires, it is a vast spiderweb, and I am on the last millionth infinite tentacle of the spiderweb, a warrior, lost, separated, a worm, a thought, a self, one of the millions of skeletons of China, one of the particular mistakes, I, Allan Ginsberg, a separate consciousness, I who want to be God, I who want to hear the infinite minutest vibration of eternal harmony, I who wait trembling my destruction by the ethereal music in the fire, I who hate God and give him a name, I who make mistakes on the eternal typewriter, I who am doomed. But at the far end of the universe, the million-eyed spider that hath no names spinneth of itself endlessly. The monster that is no monster approaches with apples, perfume, railroads, television, skulls. A universe that eats and drinks itself. Blood from my skull. Tibetan creatures with hairy breasts and zodiac on my stomach. This sacrificial victim unable to have a good time. It's just like it sucks you in more with each line. But I'm also very aware that this is a type of poetry that just does not work for everyone. I'm going to read you the end of the poem as well. Can take care of itself without me. It is both answerless. It answers not to that name. It hummeth on the electric typewriter. It types a fragmentary word, which is a fragmentary word. Mandala. Gods dance on their own bodies. New flowers open forgetting death. Celestial eyes beyond the heartbreak of illusion. I see the gay creator. Bands rise up in anthem to the world. Flags and banners waving in the transcendence. One image in the end remains myriad-eyed in eternity. This is the work. This is the knowledge. This is the end of man. That last line always is just like, it takes away my brain and it puts it in like a smoothie shaker and it turns it on. And for some reason, the brain turns the colour of the universe. Find it somewhere and read it in its entirety. It might not work for you at all. You might think this is absolute garbage. It could just like open up your brain as well. Because like when I read this poem, it is as if I'm the entire universe and the entire universe is within me. And the universe is without age, without size, without care for anything within it. That probably made no sense, but like those are the thoughts that come to my mind. It reminds me of what people say they get when they read H.P. Lovecraft. I love Lovecraft's ideas. I don't like, well, him as a person, but like his writing, I genuinely like don't like his writing, but like the ideas, this is what Lovecraft should be. It's just like conceptually it's absolutely marvelous, but that's not enough to me. If you have a good concept is just a good concept. But like the way it's brought out, it just, you feel it. You feel you are the universe and you feel the universe is within you, and it makes no sense because the universe doesn't care. Nothing is important, nothing matters, and everything is absurd, everything is bizarre, and everything is Allen Ginsberg. And genuinely, I didn't really have to think about it for long because this is a poem that has stuck with me, because genuinely when I was thinking about 21st century poetry, my mind went to, where's that collection? I remember that poem, I can't remember its name, but I remember its content. It has not left me, and I found it. It was like literally hidden behind my bookshelf. But it's by Ben Okri. But the poem that genuinely has shaken me the most of all of contemporary poetry is Grenfell Tower, June 2017. I'm gonna read you the beginning because again it's under copyright and it's a long poem. It was like a burnt matchbox in the sky. It was black and long and burnt in the sky. I saw it through flowering stumps of trees. I saw it beyond the arched spire of the church. I saw it in the tears of those who survived. I saw it through the rage of those who survived. I saw it past the posters of those who burned to ashes. I saw it past the posters of those who jumped to their deaths. I saw it through TV images of flames through windows, running up the aluminium cladding. You saw it in print images of flames bursting out from the roof. You heard it in voices loud in the streets. You heard it in the cries in the air howling for justice. You heard it in the pubs, streets, basements, dives. You heard it in the wailing of women and silent screams of orphans wandering the streets. You saw it in your baby who couldn't sleep at night, spooked by ghosts that wander the area still trying to escape fires that came at them black and choking. You saw it in dreams of the dead who ask if living has no meaning, being poor in a land where poor die in flames without warning. But when you saw it with your eyes, it seemed what the eyes saw didn't make sense, can't make sense, won't make sense. I'm gonna stop there because I don't know where else to stop. It is an absolutely beautiful, beautiful piece of poetry. Again, we are back where we started. You know, you can all that goes around comes around, because again, like the first poem written by Voltaire 300 years ago about a disaster that occurred, about how it related to his contemporary philosophies and ideas and a criticism of it, and it's very sharp. It was very, you know, like all those things I talked, like how ugly it is. 21st century, contemporary thoughts, opinions, contemporary political ideologies, commentary on the current situation, on a current like tragedy of its kind, though obviously a different kind. Politics plays a large part of how I view things. I think it's very important. I think it's not something ignored, and I love when politics are explored through art. That's not something I always had, because I didn't necessarily, actually I didn't grow up in an environment which had the same opinions that I do. I had to find them on my own. I couldn't inherit them, and I had to find them through art, because you can't just jump into things and be like, well, this is how people around me believe, this is how I've been taught to believe, I'm just gonna go there and believe that. It's something you encounter in your life, and then when you read something, you hear something, you see something, and it shakes you, and then you start to look for it. That's why I think political art is so important. And this definitely, it shook me, it shaped me, and it made me think about a lot of contemporary issues, because a lot of those other things, yeah, they've shaped me, they made me think about, you know, all these things, themes that are prevalent in my life as well, but like this is actually current day prevalent. Like, of course, a lot of those things that have been written throughout hundreds of years, they haven't gone away. You know, the problems that Voltaire was complaining about, do they still apply? Yeah, to a degree, but this is now. And I think that is why it hit me so hard, that it really left an incredibly big impact on me. It's just probably my favorite. No, it's not probably, it is my favorite poem of the 21st century. And I absolutely love the usage of repetition in general. I love using repetition myself, and I love when it's used in poetry. Again, you don't need a specific rhythm, you don't need specific, like, you don't need to follow heroic couplets or AB rhyme scheme for your poetry to have rhythm, for it to have melody, for it to flow like this does. It's just brilliant. I think I'm gonna end there. I said in the beginning that these are my 5 favorite poems. I would reiterate that and say these are the 5 poems that have left the biggest impact on me. These are the 5 poems that I still think about often, and poems that have shaped the way I view the world, and poems that have shaped the way I view art and philosophy and literature and poetry and myself. But I hoped someone enjoyed this and someone got something out of it. So maybe I introduced you to some new poems, or maybe I just introduced you to some new thoughts. I want to know what poem or poems have shaped your life, or like what poems have really touched you the most. And if you want to hear more of my thoughts, do stick around if you're new here. And if you're not, and you're still watching, please like this video. It was fun to talk about things that I love, poetry that I love, literature I love, and I can't wait to talk more about stuff that I love. That is why I'm here, and I'm gonna go now.